Happy Thanksgiving Day weekend. It's the 29th of November, 2020. We're almost through November, and we are about 50 days from Joe Biden taking the presidency of the United States. Let me start by thanking all of you for all the work you did in this election, the postcards, the calls, everything you did to get out the vote, everything you did for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's candidacy. And now let's discuss all the things we need to discuss that also relate to this. In 1972, for his re-election, Richard Nixon, appealing to the silent majority, quote, quote, and with a platform not that dissimilar from Donald Trump's, although it was on a couple of points and we'll hit them later, got 60.7% of the vote. Crushed his Democratic opponent, went on to be almost impeached and to resign, but crushed his Democratic opponent. This year, Donald John Trump, appealing to the silent majority, got about 47%. 13 or 14% less than Richard Nixon did. And that, of course, is because the ideals that define the silent majority have lost any appeal to the people. In 1977, in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, at a conference called Jesus 77, as a young person, I sat on the hillside across from its National Amphitheater. I was across from the stage, and I watched Pat Robertson, and I think I have a picture of him in that speech, although the recording I had of the speech was on cassette and long ago decayed. But I have a picture, I believe, of him while he gave this speech, and he spoke about the only method of saving evangelical Christianity was by taking over one of the two major political parties and using force to bring non-Christians, quote, quote, and mainstream Christians, although we weren't called that then, into line with the doctrines of the evangelical movement. And he said that the party that the religious right had to take over was the Republican Party, because if they tried to take the Democratic Party, it was larger, and the labor movement would fight them for control. So he was very clear on who it had to be. And he was apparently prescient in a way. He understood how to graph demographics, because in 1980, 3 years after that speech, the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest church in that coalition, had about 24 million active members, according to the National Handbook of Churches at that time. Last year, the membership director of the Southern Baptist Church, now we're talking about active members here, people who attend and give money, and the membership director of the Southern Baptist Church said they now set at, give or take, 8 million. That means they've lost 2 out of 3 of their members. Now, most of them aged out and passed into spirit. Some of them left. Among their younger, the kids who grew up in the church, many are leaving. They can't stomach the views, because the Southern Baptist Church and other evangelical churches became something else other than what they had been prior. The Assemblies of God is about the same size it was then numerically, which, given its evangelicalization efforts, is enormously disappointing to them, I am sure. The megachurches, I know of 3 major megachurches that 5 years ago were robust and healthy, that have closed since then for lack of money and lack of membership. So that's the way things evolve and change. And the same thing is happening to the Republican Party. Now, the evangelical movement did take largely control of the Republican Party, at least the primary process, and they still have enormous input into the Republican Party. But they are getting more desperate. Enter Donald Trump. Donald John Trump and his followers have taken the entire structure of the movement of the Republican Party far, far to some bizarre corner of the right than it ever was. Those of you who do know me, and a few do, I'm sure, no matter how wide a viewership this ever gets, which probably won't be much, but you never know, know that I was evangelical for a number of years in my youth after my parents' death, and also know that I was on the right. My first non-Republican support was for a man named Ross Perot. And it was also the first campaign I was involved in. And after that, I moved to the Democrats, and I was a member of the party when we lived in New York. And then when we came out here, I became an independent again. And then I joined a little third party called the Optimists Party until 2016. And in 2016, I initially supported Trump. I gave him money. I was crazy, but I learned better. And I left him. I joined the Democratic Party. I'm now a Democratic committeeman. But he won in 2016. This year, with the highest turnout election since 1908, he did not win. But he could not accept that he did not win. And he started spinning hysteric theories of fraud, of voter suppression, and his lawyers, the things they've come up with, to lose 33 out of 34 suits, some of them with prejudice, which means they can't be refiled, is incredible. This most recent ruling by a 3-judge panel in the Federal Appeals Court in Pennsylvania, where 3 judges, all appointed by Republicans, with the head of the panel, the Chief Justice of the panel, being someone Trump appointed. And they said, yes, election fraud is a very serious thing, but there's no evidence. And they tossed it out. Pro forma tossed it out. And they're going to press on to the Supreme Court. The same thing's going to happen, because there is no evidence of voting fraud. None. They are talking, the only cases of voting fraud I know of, and they're single cases, and you're talking about trying to overturn millions of votes. They've requested millions of votes to be just thrown out, not counted at all, because there might have been fraud. At that point, it's not a democracy or a republic. It's a dictatorship with a pretend election, like the Soviets used to have, I guess unsurprisingly. The judges aren't having it, and I don't believe the Supreme Court is even going to give it a hearing, because the Supreme Court does not accept new evidence. You have to have established the evidence and presented a case that's compelling in the lower court and had them make a decision that could arguably be wrong in law. They haven't made a case anywhere that could arguably be wrong in law. So, here we sat at a point when the Republican Party is seeing what happened to the evangelical movement now happening to it. They've lost their youth. People my son's age, now people my age narrowly back Trump this time. People a generation after mine backed Biden. People my son's age, mid-20s, it was 70-30. 70% support for Biden, 30% for Trump. And when you get to the generation just becoming voting eligible over the next 4 years, it was over 80-20 in favor of Biden. And repeated academic studies have shown that the old myth about people moving to the right as they get older and they blah, 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 it's a myth. It's a lie. In fact, the evidence is very strong that what you believe politically when you are 20 is with rare exceptions, I think I am one, is what you believe politically when you are 60. People don't change. If you're on the left, you're on the left. If you're on the right, you're on the right, period. So they have taken to a multi-pronged approach. Suppress as many votes as possible, didn't work this year. Throw out as many votes as possible, didn't work this year. And rile up your base as much as you can. That worked. I give Trump credit. He turned every voter that could agree with him out. Biden turned out more who didn't. A lot more. That 13-14% difference is enormous. The silent majority is no longer a majority. That is a fact. We had over 70% turnout among eligible voters, and looking at other voters who were eligible and didn't vote, they are to the left by a few points of, and that's on a 100-point scale, of the people who did vote. He turned out every voter on the right at an incredible rate. I give him credit for this. But he lost. And then he started those conspiracy theories. And those are now coming home to rest. Ronna McDaniels, or Romney McDaniels, actually, who is the chair of the Republican National Committee, and whose uncle is one of the last sane Republicans, or at least one of the last ones that will admit to being sane, went to Georgia. There are 2 runoffs in the Senate there, and she was going down to rile up donors and major activists to raise more money, blah, blah, blah. Instead, she spent her entire time period defending the idea that there was a reason to fight. They believed Trump's rhetoric, even mainstream donors. One woman actually point blank said to her, "Why am I donating money and giving my time if the decision has already been made?" And McDaniels had to, while trying not to step on Trump's toes and deny his fraudulent conspiracy theories, she had to now explain to the woman, no, it hasn't been decided. And that's what she spent her time doing. There's a significant movement in Georgia among Republicans to refuse to vote in the runoff because the party allowed is the word they use, the Democrats to win. The Democrats won because they turned out more voters, because we're not a dictatorship. The Republican Party of today is not the Republican Party of my youth. The Republican Party of my youth was moderately economically conservative and moderately socially moderate. The belief structure that the religious right brought on board, which has now been exemplified by Trump's people 100-fold over, that belief system did not exist. There was no racism, there was no homophobia, there was no virulently anti-social structure belief system in the Republican Party of my youth. Richard Nixon was the last major candidate who openly spoke prior to these, who openly spoke of universal health coverage, who openly spoke of guaranteed 100% employment. Think about that. Can you imagine a Republican candidate saying those things now? I believed those things when I was first voting. I still do. The party left me. It became the party of Donald J. Trump and of McConnell, who willingly will obstruct to the point where he destroys the United States and kills hundreds of thousands of more people just to prevent Joe Biden from having an effective governance. Unless, of course, the people in Georgia who are refusing to vote because they think the Republican Party fixed the race for Biden for some bizarre reason, actually don't vote as they're threatening. And at that point, we gain control of the Senate, and we will be able then to restore so many things in the United States. And I sincerely hope that all of you will work for that end, and that perhaps, I don't think the Republican Party is salvageable, but what needs to happen, if that is true, is that it needs to be fade somewhere else, and the moderately conservative, the normal right, needs to eject it. Let them have their control, more or less, of the 8 states of the old Confederacy, and create a center-right party that can actually compete for the rest of the voters in the rest of the country with a center-left party, because we function best with a multi-party system, and at this point there's only one party capable of governing, and it's the Democrats. And hey, that's okay with me, but I don't think that's healthy for the country. Whether it's the Libertarians that rise to the occasion and get powerful enough to replace the Republicans, whether it's a party I've never heard of, whether, for goodness sakes, if the Bull Moose Party has to rise from the grave and run again, there needs to be a major party that arises that is not possessed by cultists. Thank you.